Who is a caliph? What does the term caliph denote? The Holy Quran has two references to caliph. The book declares Adam as the first caliph in Surah Al-Baqarah. It also tells biblical King David, "We have made you a caliph on earth." The word caliph is derived from the Arabic term khalifa, but it has many connotations like many other Arabic words. It means to deputize for a person, in this case for Allah. But like many passages in Quran, its precise meaning cannot be determined. Since God is eternal and cannot have successor, the reference must mean the deputy or representative of God on earth. Why were Adam and David chosen as caliph and others like Jesus or Moses or Abraham not? The Quran is completely silent on that. The term came into usage whenever Prophet had to leave Medina on military expedition or otherwise. He used to appoint a deputy or khalifa during his absence. After the demise of Muhammad, the Muslim community was confronted with an unprecedented situation. To understand what happened after Prophet's death, it is pertinent to understand the composition of the Muslim community as it existed in Medina. Muhammad himself was not from Medina but born and brought up in Mecca. He belonged to Quraysh tribe, which was socially and politically most important class. Within the Quraysh, Muhammad was a member of the extended family of the Banu Hashim. This group included his uncle Abu Talib, whose son Ali later became Muhammad's son-in-law. It did not include the rich and powerful Umayyad family, also from Quraysh, who dominated the trade and political life of the settlement. When Muhammad's position in Mecca became untenable due to his preaching, he made his famous journey to Medina known as Hijra. He was joined by several members of Quraysh, who were committed to follow him in exile. They were known as the Mujahirin, those who had made Hijra with the Prophet. They came to form the elite of the nascent Muslim community. The existing inhabitants of Medina came to be known as Ansar or helpers of the Prophet. The two groups shared the space and resources of the oasis city with little open friction because of the Prophet's role as mediator. But the differences still existed based ultimately on kinship. The Ansar were certainly not of Quraysh origin. The Quraysh were a widely respected group in Arabia. They were great merchants and men of the world with wide horizons accustomed to leadership. The Ansar were peasants who made their living from cultivation, and their outlook was confined to their small community. As the news of Muhammad's death spread through the town, both parties took action to secure their position. The Ansar gathered in the Saqifa or portico of Banu Sayda. The fundamental account about the assembly at Saqifa of Banu Sayda goes back to Al-Abbas, the Prophet's cousin. All other accounts draw information from it or later elaborations of this account. Upon hearing about the meeting, Abu Bakr and Omar rushed there, fearing a potential coup. Here Habab ibn Mundhir, a veteran of Battle of Badr, suggested that Ansar and Mujahirin should select their separate leaders. Abu Bakr, venerated for his wisdom and his close association with the Prophet, addressed the gathering. He stressed the point that the Arab would not recognize the rule of anyone but the tribe of Quraysh to which Prophet belonged. He presented Omar and Abu Ubaidah as the choice. But Omar took the hand of Abu Bakr and swore the oath of allegiance to him. The Mujahirin and Ansar followed suit. But there was one group that did not participate in choosing the successor. That was the immediate family of the Prophet, which was busy in making preparations for the final rites. Among them the cousin and son-in-law of Muhammad, Ali, was excluded from the agreement. Most sources insist that he later accepted, but his followers, and perhaps Ali himself, saw it as coup d'état, which has essentially deprived him of his natural rights. Two issues were resolved by this ad hoc response to a temporary crisis. First issue was that the leader of the community or caliph was to be a member of Quraysh tribe. It remained a key doctrine shared by Sunnis and Shias alike. Secondly, the family of the Prophet was excluded from the process. Furthermore, the Ansar, despite all their loyalty to the Prophet, were relegated to a second-class status. The main challenge before Abu Bakr was to maintain the unity of the Muslim community or Ummah, and establish the authority of the ruler. Soon after assuming the leadership, he was faced with a grave religious political challenge, with several Arab tribes revolting, threatening the unity and stability of the new state. Many Arab tribes had converted to Islam during Muhammad's lifetime because of the power and influence wielded by the Prophet. However, once Muhammad died, these tribes were keen to return to their old customs and religious practices. They also resented the zakat tax, an alms tax that all Muslims of a high social standing had to pay. Therefore, several tribes renounced their allegiance to the Muslim community after Muhammad's death. Yet another chose prophets of their own, like Musaylima in eastern Arabia. The argument was that if Quraysh had a prophet, it is only fair that they should have one too. In the Muslim tradition, this movement was known as Ridda or rejection. Abu Bakr, ably assisted by Omar, initiated a series of military campaign against the rebels which is known as Ridda Wars or War on Apostasy. Caliph Abu Bakr's chief commander was Khalid ibn al-Walid, a member of the old aristocracy of Quraysh and later venerated in history and legend as the Sayf Islam or Sword of Islam. The campaigns were pursued without mercy and were swiftly successful. By the end of Abu Bakr's reign in 634 AD, the tribes of Arabia were effectively brought back under the control of Medina. In subjugating the various rebel factions, a new principle was established. There was no going back on acceptance of Islam. The rejectionist or apostate, called murtad in Arabic, could be and should be killed by any righteous Muslim. The Ridda also led to the emergence of a new class of Muslims. The Quraysh and Mujahirin were the elite of the community, with Ansar in a subordinate position. The rejectionists who had been brought back to the community in the wars were third-class citizens. Abu Bakr died peacefully in his old age, having nominated Omar as his successor. In his 27 months reign he accomplished a great deal. He also acquired the informal title of Siddiq, the truthful or trustworthy, reflecting the respect in which his memory was held by Muslims. The 10 years of reign of Omar was the age of great Arabian conquest and expansion. By the end of Omar's reign, the Levant, Egypt, Libya, eastern Anatolia, almost the whole of the Sassanid Persian Empire including Bactria, Persia, Azerbaijan, Armenia, Caucasus and Makran were annexed to the Rashidun Caliphate. The great Arabian conquests were essentially a continuation of the wars against the rejectionists. Initially there were two main fronts, Syria and Iraq. The conquest of Syria was achieved by a comparatively small number of the members of the Muslim elite and tribes from Hejaz in western Arabia. They were actively supported by the local tribes, some of whom were and continued to be Christian. The Byzantine armies were defeated in the Battle of Yarmouk in 636 AD. The Iraqi campaign was mostly led by the members of Quraysh such as Sa'd ibn Waqqas. But most of the rank and file of the army came from the non-elite groups, mostly the tribesmen from northern and eastern Arabia. It was to lead to continuous conflict between the Iraqi and Syrian Arab Muslims, which ultimately led to the downfall of the Rashidun Caliphate. The conquests resulted in the control of large areas of territory and a large population. The question before Omar was how to administer the recently conquered lands and reward the Muslims for their part in the victorious campaigns. Umar convened an assembly at which this question was discussed. The economic aspect of the question was that if such lands were distributed, no assets would be left with the state to provide the source of revenue for the future. The social aspect was that if such lands were distributed, some people would get rich, while the others would remain poor. Those who have fought on various fronts would on that basis get lands in various countries, and that would create great disparity among the ranks of the Muslims. That was repugnant to Islam. Omar elaborated, "These lands belong to the coming generations and are therefore the property of the nation. How can I then distribute them among those who are present and deprive those who will come after?" The debate lasted for several days, and ultimately the consensus of opinion emerged in favor of the view advanced by Omar. He instituted a system in which the conquered lands and the revenue collected from them were kept as an undivided resource, called fay in Arabic. The proceeds of fay were to be used to support the Arab tribesmen. They were not allowed to scatter in the conquered territories but settled in specially founded new towns. These new settlements were called Amsar. Several such towns were founded throughout the conquered territories like Kufa, Basra and Mosul in Iraq, Fustat or Old Cairo and Kairouan in Tunisia, and Shiraz in Iran. Their names and payments to which they are entitled were written in lists called diwans. Thus, a firm government control had been established over the movements and settlements of the Arabs. The presence of large numbers of soldiers dependent on government salaries was a major factor in the emergence of a vibrant market economy. It means the government had to mint coins and maintain a bureaucracy. It led to a development of a class invested in writing and other intellectual activities. It also led to the emergence of conflict and disaffection over the distribution of resources. The principle of precedence or sabaka was followed. The early converts to Islam had precedence and hence higher salaries. The late joiners and former rejectionists were on very low levels of rewards. But the fact that the system was inaugurated by Omar gave it a quasi-religious authority. Another legacy of Omar is the so-called Pact of Omar or Ahad Omar. It was not a formal written document, but a series of rules and regulations concerning the status of non-Muslim subjects like Jews, Christians, Jews, Zoroastrians and others. Non-Muslims were granted the status of the dhimmi, that is protected peoples, and poll tax or jaziyya was imposed on them. The non-Muslim were allowed to retain their faith, places of worship, along with their personal property. They were prohibited from building new churches, conducting religious processions, criticizing Islam, and bearing weapons. Omar ruled from Medina and almost never left Hejaz. An exception was made by his visit to Jerusalem. After the siege of Jerusalem in 637 AD by the Rashidun army, Patriarch Sophronius refused to surrender except to Caliph Omar. Omar traveled to Jerusalem and accepted the surrender. Omar was given a tour of the city. Sophronius invited Omar to pray inside the Church of the Holy Sepulchre. But Omar refused. He insisted that if he prayed there, later Muslims would use it as an excuse to convert it into a mosque. Instead he prayed outside the church, where a mosque called Masjid Umar was later built. A famous treaty called Umayyad Covenant was concluded between Omar and Patriarch. Omar offered members of all faiths safety in Jerusalem and protection for their beliefs and holy places, forbidding them to be desecrated and destroyed. According to an ancient Jewish tradition, he also allowed Jews who had been rigorously excluded from the city by the Byzantine to return. Much of these perhaps legendary details survive in Arabic Christian narratives, which stressed that the greatest caliph of them had accepted the holiness of the church and right of the Christians. Omar was stabbed by Abu Lukluk, a Persian slave, when he was leading the morning prayers. Lukluk was a resident of Persia, who converted to Islam after Omar conquered Persia. As Omar lay dying, he convened a shura, or advisory council, to select the next leader. He nominated 6 members to the council. All of them were from Quraysh tribe. The Ansar of Medina and the rest of the Muslims were excluded. After some deliberation, the shura elected Uthman, a Qurayshi of course, and one of the earliest companions of Muhammad. The shura which chose Uthman was the only open and properly constituted body in the history of the Caliphate. Uthman has a very varied reputation among Muslim historians and commentators. Having been raised to the supreme position without any effort on his own part evidently strengthened his belief that he had been chosen and invested by God. Now that Omar's immense force of personality was absent, the Muslim community is entering a very difficult period. Internal pressures that could tear her apart had begun to build up. The provincial governors were becoming very powerful, and it was they rather than Uthman who initiated further campaign of conquest. Uthman's policy of establishing members of his clan as governors throughout the empire was fully evident even during the early years of his reign. 5 years after his accession, all major governorships were solidly in the hands of the caliph's relatives, invariably from the Banu Umayyah. However, it did not provoke serious opposition during the first half of his reign. He was able to keep the prominent companions and Quraysh well disposed by his general leniency, which contrasted sharply with Umar's sternness, and through his extravagant presence. Uthman deemed it within his right to dispose freely of the powers and riches of the caliphate at his own discretion and deeply resented any criticism or interference in his conduct by anyone. He continually made grants to his extended family from state funds invoking Quranic injunction to provide for one's kin. Uthman's alienation of the communal fey and its reconversion into crown land aroused discontent in the garrison towns. It provoked accusations that the caliph and his governors were misappropriating mal al-Muslimin, money belonging to the Muslims collectively, as mal Allah, money at the discretionary disposal of the caliph. In Kufa, the unguarded boast of Uthman's governor that the fertile cultivated land of Iraq was the Garden of Quraysh provoked a riot among a group of Quran readers led by Malik al-Ashtar. Discontent grew in Kufa, among the army in Egypt and in Medina itself. In the early summer of 1656, an angry crowd of mutineers which arrived from Egypt, Kufa and Basra surrounded his house in Medina. Ali tried to help Uthman by mediating and urging him to repent. At one point Uthman did acknowledge his mistakes, but his cousin Marwan believed that this would be a sign of weakness. In frustration, Ali washed his hands of the situation. As mutineers besieged Caliph's house, demanding his replacement, Uthman justified himself by writing letters in which he maintained that he had kept his promises. He stressed the dignity of his office. He did not envisage using force to defend his position. Instead, he looked to the companions and widows of Muhammad for moral support. Despite this, several men went to his house to guard it, including Ali's son Hassan. On the 17th of June 656 AD, the house of Uthman was stormed. Uthman had told the defenders to go to their own houses, saying that the assailants wanted only him. Despite the caliph's wishes, there was fighting, and several participants were killed. It was alleged by tradition that Caliph was slain by Muhammad, a son of Abu Bakr. He was murdered as he sat alone reading the Quran, and his blood dripped on the open pages of the holy book. The murder of Uthman unleashed a complex series of events. At first, authority passed to Ali. By the norms of the early caliphate, it lacked legitimacy. Ali was not chosen by a shura of the most eminent early companions, which Umar had stipulated as a condition for valid succession. Nor had he the backing of the majority of Quraysh, who under Abu Bakr's constitution had been recognized as the ruling class solely entitled to decide on the caliphate. But there is no doubt that Ali believed he was entitled to succession. As the news of Uthman's murder spread, companions of Prophet approached Ali and offered their allegiance. Ali insisted that the pledges should be made publicly in the mosque. The pledges included Zubair and Talha, two of the leading companions who had been members of the shura that had selected Uthman. They would later claim that they were coerced into doing so. Uthman's powerful family, the Umayyads, demanded that the murderers of their kinsmen should be punished. Many of the Umayyads left Medina and took refuge with Muawiyah ibn Abu Sufyan, the powerful Umayyad governor of Great Assyria. Muawiyah refused to take oath of allegiance unless Ali avenged the murder of his kinsman Uthman. The first challenge came from within the elite of Quraysh. Opponents to his rule gathered in Mecca. These consisted of two main groups. First, there was the party of the majority of Quraysh, who hoped to restore the Caliphate of Quraysh on the principles laid down by Abu Bakr and Omar. They were uneasy about the main source for the Ali's support, the Ansar, and soldiers from non-Qurayshi tribes. Another party was the Umayyads and their partisans, who believed that the Caliphate had through Uthman become their property. Mecca became the natural center of the Qurayshi opposition. Here Aisha raised the flag of revenge for Uthman. There was now an exodus of prominent Qurayshites from Medina to Mecca. Talha and al-Zubair, seeing that others had successfully resisted pledging allegiance to Ali, quickly broke their own oaths and left without leave. Zubair, along with Aisha and Talha, went to the new Muslim town of Basra in Iraq to garner more support. Ali realized that he had to find more allies outside Medina. He left for Iraq to appeal to the Muslims of Kufa. After all, he had supported the Kufan grievances against the rule of Uthman. In December 1656, the armies of Ali and Zubair met near Basra in what is known as the Battle of the Camel. Both Zubair and Talha were killed.
Aisha, who had played conspicuous part in the battle directing the troops from the Howdah from her camel, was forced to retire to the Hijaz. There she passed her days in political obscurity. The immediate challenge to Ali's caliphate was settled. It was the first open civil war with the Muslim community, called the First Fitna. The issue of the caliphate was not settled by a shura or nomination by a previous caliph, but by hard military power. It set a pattern for much of the future development of the office of caliph. After his victory, Ali did not return to Medina but stayed in Kufa and made the city as the center of his government. The immediate challenge to caliphate was overcome, but Muawiyah posed a much bigger challenge to Ali's authority. Muawiyah consistently refused to swear allegiance and held Ali responsible for the murder of Uthman. Ali was in catch-22 situation as Muawiyah's demands were impossible to fulfill. Ali depended on the support of the very people who mutinied and attacked Uthman. In the early summer of 657 AD, Ali led an army up the Euphrates Valley towards Syria. It encountered Muawiyah forces at Siffin, north of Raqqa. There was reluctance to fight fellow Muslims. The armies faced each other for 3 months. There were intermittent skirmishes over water in the blazing summer of Syria. In August, the battle seemed to be developing. After 3 days of battle, the Syrian troops attached copies of the Quran to their lances, demanding that there be an arbitration according to the Book of God. Ali felt that he had no option but to accept. An arbitration date was set up. Each side would have one arbitrator. They would meet in the small town of Udru, now an archaeological site in southern Jordan. But the issues of arbitration were not clear. Would the arbitration decide who would be the caliph? Or it was the issue of the punishment of the Uthman's killers? On Ali's return to Iraq, his coalition began to break up. His many radical supporters abandoned him. They declared that arbitration belonged only to God and issue should have been decided on the battlefield. The splinter group of dissidents became known as Kharijites or Khawarij. In Arabic, the word Khawari means one who goes out. It is related to the verses of the Quran, which urges Muslim to go out on the jihad. Khawarij are important in the history of caliphate because they developed alternate theories of the office. Their theories are different from the concepts of both Shia and Sunnis. Khawarij believed that most pious and meritorious person should be chosen as caliph from among the Muslims. The Quraysh descent is not mandatory. How the choosing of the new leader takes place was never specified. There was no mention of election or shura. It was taken for granted that the most meritorious would emerge, who would be acceptable to the community. If the caliph is found not up to mark, then he should be corrected. First he should be warned, and if this failed, he would be deposed or killed. Another point of Khawarij ideology was that those who sinned should no longer be considered Muslim but Kafirs. All true Muslims should hunt Kafirs and kill them and sell their women and children in slavery. The ideology of takfir, which means excommunication from Islam of one Muslim by another, originated with the Khawarij. It was followed by some other groups right down to the present. The Islamic State or Daesh follow this attitude towards Muslim who disagree with them. Ali prepared to invade Syria again, but he had to deal with Khawari menace first. Ali met them at Nahawin on the 17th of July 658 AD. In the Battle of Nahawin, the Khawari were decisively defeated. In the period after Nahawin, Ali's position declined. Muawiyah began to subvert some of his support and launched raids in the territories belonging to Ali. There was never a final showdown between Ali and Muawiyah. On the 28th of January 661 AD, a Khawarij assassin struck Ali with a poisoned sword, while he was entering the mosque to perform his morning prayers. Ali died 2 days later. The assassination of Ali was followed by the assumption of power by Muawiyah, the first Umayyad caliph. It marked the end of an era of violence and division, but it was also that period of great achievements. The Arab Muslim conquered large territories from Iran to southern Tunisia. The caliph and the idea of caliphate played a pivotal role in such great achievement. Neither the nature of the office of the caliph was defined nor the method of choosing the caliph was settled.
But fundamentally the Caliph presented an ideal of a leader who combined political and military authority with spiritual guidance.